Welcome to Game Fondue Reviews. In this video we're going to take a look at Rivals for Catan, which is basically a card-driven two-player version of Catan. We're going to jump right in with a description of the rules, see a few example turns being played, and then I'll return for some closing remarks. This is the setup for Rivals for Catan, at least the basic setup. There's three different setups. We're going to go over each briefly, depending if you're playing the basic game, the theme games, or the Duel of the Princes. In all cases, players have their own cards. This is the blue player and the red player, and they start with a road and two settlements attached to it, and 6 regions at the edges of settlements. They're always at the corner of settlements. Face down on the board, you got roads, settlements, and cities. They don't need to be shuffled. They're all the same, just like regular Catan. But the regions you do need to shuffle because they're going to come out randomly. Now, for the introductory game, you take the 4 basic sets and you divide them out evenly, and those are the draw piles. For each of the theme games, you'll turn these into 3 equal piles, and you'll lay out the pile of cards corresponding with that particular theme game, and then 2 special cards in that group will be face up that anybody can buy at any time. Lastly, for the Duel of the Princes, there are cards that have like a half moon symbol on them right like there, and all of those will be removed from all the different stacks, but then the 3 basic set piles will be laid out, and the remaining cards from each of the 3 theme decks will be laid out. And depending if you're playing the basic game, which we are, or the others, the event stack will be a little different. In all cases, you shuffle the event stack from your particular group, and you put 3 cards at the bottom of the deck, and the Yule event card will go on top of those face down with the rest of the stack on top. If you're playing the themes, you mix in addition to the basic set, your own cards from your theme event. If you're playing Duel of the Princes, you take all of the event cards without that half moon symbol and you form a stack, and then you take all the rest with the half moon symbol, shuffle them up, and deal out 6 face down. Nobody gets to look at them, but that's going to make your event stack for that round. In all cases, a player is going to choose a stack of cards. I'm just going to try to split this in half to make them even. It might not be perfectly even, although it's supposed to be. But a player chooses a stack of cards, looks through it, and actually picks 3 cards from there to be their starting hand, but they can't influence the rest of the cards in the stack. Also, at this point, after looking at your cards, players can rearrange their regions. It's also important to note that all the regions except the region producing gold start with 1 resource in your possession, and it reminds you of that because it has the words in the bottom corner. If you can read the word, it's positioned the right direction. So let's talk about the game turn. The game turn has a few different parts. You always do them in order. The first is roll dice, then take actions, then check your hand size, and lastly you have the option to exchange a card from your hand. The basic game, which is what we're going to be going through here, ends when somebody gets to 7 victory points, the theme game 12, and the Duel of the Princes 13. So let's first talk about rolling the dice. So on your turn, there's a production die and there's an event die. You roll them. Now, you always produce first unless you get this red symbol, this brigand attack symbol, but the other symbols are all black and result in you producing first. So you always produce the regions that have the same number. So this player would produce sheep, and you just do that by turning it, and this player would produce gold. And you always know how much you have because it's the closest to you. The most you can have at any one resource location is 3, so you go beyond that and you'll lose them. So then the other parts of the event are just these different sides that you resolve after producing. So let's start with this. This is the event card. So you draw an event card and you do what it says. Next is the plentiful harvest, in which case each player just produces 1 resource. And then we have the trade. If you have the trade advantage, which we'll talk about in a little bit, you get to steal a resource from your opponent. And lastly, the celebration just results in the player with the most skill points getting a resource of their choice. If no one player has the most skill points, each player gets a resource of their choice. And last is the violent brigand attack. And what happens if you have more than 7 resources, you lose all your gold and all of your wool or sheep. So the next part of your turn is taking actions, and that just involves playing cards and trading, which you can do in any order, and you can alternate between the activities. So you can play any card from your hand. Most cards have a cost in the upper left corner, and then there's also some action cards that are free, and there's even some cards to build that are free. So yellow cards are action cards, and you just play them, and they are discarded from the game. Green cards are played above settlements or cities. Red cards must be played above cities. They cannot be played above settlements. And lastly are these extraordinary sites, which are very weird. There's only one in the base game, and that gets played above or below regions. They don't really take up space on your board at all. But settlements and cities and roads are always available to build. So when you build a new road, it costs 1 wood and 2 brick. It just continues the path here along your center line of your principality. And you can build new settlements once you have a road to connect them to. You only need 1 road, doesn't have to be 2 apart or anything like that. Settlements are worth 1 victory point, and when you get up to cities, those are worth 2. And they go right on top of settlements, and the settlement stays there. One important thing to understand is when you build a new settlement, you also take the top 2 region cards from the deck, and you can lay them out however you please at the corners of that settlement. So now you have more opportunities to produce more goods. Each settlement has 1 space above it and below it to build cards, and each city actually has 2 places above it and below it to build cards. So that's important for the purposes of this game. So when you build a card, you just pay that number of resources by twisting your resource producing regions, and you lay it out. As a free action during your turn, if you feel you're a little clogged up, you can freely discard from the game any building or unit that you have built on your principality. And for trading, you trade 3 to 1. It must be the same resource. So if I had 3 sheep, I could trade those 3 sheep in for any one other resource. There are some cards that let you trade a little bit more favorably. For example, this grain ship lets you trade 2 to 1 when you're trading wheat. So after you're done taking your actions, you check your hand size. Your hand size is always 3 cards, unless you have a card with a book symbol on it in front of you. For every book in your board, you increase your hand size by 1. So at this point in your turn, if you have more than your hand size, you discard down to the correct size, and you discard by putting cards at the bottom of these decks. They're not removed from the game like when you play an action or discard a building. But if you are below that hand size, you actually draw from the stacks, whichever stacks you'd like, to get up to the correct hand size. After you get there, the last part of your turn is the option to exchange a card. Same situation, you can take 1 card from your hand, put it under one of the piles, and you have 2 options for how you're going to exchange that card. You can either take the top card of one of the decks, any of the decks, doesn't have to be the same one you put under for free, or you pay any 2 resources, doesn't have to be the same, and you take one of the stacks, look through it, and then pick the card you want, being careful not to mix up the order of any of the other cards. The last thing to keep in mind is the strength advantage, which is this token here, and the trade advantage. When you get the at least 3 strength tokens, this guy is very, very strong. You get to take that strength advantage. But if somebody ties you or passes you, you're going to lose it. Tie, it'll just go back to neutral, but if somebody passes you, they're going to get it, and that's worth 1 victory point. The trade advantage works exactly the same way, but it's based on these commerce symbols. There's only one more type of symbol, and that is the skill point symbol, which we have one here. It's this green symbol, and all that does is affect how many resources you get during this celebration event. Let's get going with our playthrough in Rivals for Catan. So each player takes a stack of cards, looks through it, and picks a starting hand of 3 cards. And they can certainly rearrange their regions at this time, but we're not going to do so. This player is going to start, so he rolls the dice. He gets a question mark and a 2, so everybody produces their 2 first, and the question mark reveals an event. Each player may take up to 2 resources of his choice, paying 1 gold per resource. Unfortunately, no one has any gold yet, so nothing's going to happen there. So in this player's turn, he decides to build the Abbey by paying a brick, a wheat, and an ore, and he's just going to throw that down there. So his turn is over. He's decided he's done all he wants to do for right now. So he draws up to 3 plus 1 for this Abbey. So he's actually going to get 2 cards. And then at this point in his turn, he can exchange a card. He chooses to exchange Brigida the Wise Woman, putting her down here and just drawing from this pile. He could have paid 2 resources to look through the stack and pick the card he wanted, but he didn't feel like doing that. So now this player starts, rolls 2 dice. Oh, another event and a 2 production. So that one is full, as is this one. So this event is the player who has the strength advantage selects 3 of his opponent's buildings. The opponent must remove 1 of them and return it to the bottom of a matching draw stack. So that could be very, very fierce, but at this time, no one has the strength advantage. So for this player's turn, he's decided he would like to play Harold. Harold costs him a wheat and an ore, so he's going to throw him down there. And Harold has 2 strength, so he's looking to get that strength advantage pretty soon. But for now, he's going to stop, and his hand size is 3. So he draws 1 card, and he decides he'd like to throw this card back to the bottom of a stack and draw from another. Again, he could have paid, but he chose not to at this time. We're going to move ahead in the game a little bit. I'll see you back at a more complicated situation. Welcome back. It's this player's turn. He's going to roll the dice. He gets a celebration and a 1, so we do the 1 first. He gets a sheep, and this player gets a wheat and a gold. So celebration, whoever has the most skill points gets an extra resource, which is just this player, because this player has no skill points. So he's going to take a wood here. Fortunately for this player, he has the merchant caravan. Discard 2 resources and take any 2 resources of your choice. So he's going to play that. So he is going to get rid of these 2 ore, and he's going to take a wheat, and we'll just say he also takes an ore. So then he builds a settlement for each of these and puts it here. He still gets the 2 regions if he really wants to, but the game is over because he now has 1, 2, 3, 4 for the biggest military, 5, 6, 7 points. And that is the victory condition in the basic game.
It's not unusual after a game of Catan for me to be asked if that can be played 2-player. And the answer is not really with the rules as written. It wouldn't be the same game. That being said, I don't think this is really the same game either, and that's fine. That's probably not the objective, but some people will see this and think, oh, that's 2-player Catan, and I don't think so. Catan, one of the big elements is the social interaction, the trading, and kind of that tight map where not everybody fits and you're kind of blocking other people and they're blocking you and things of that nature. But in this, everybody's board is completely independent, and there are people who are going to love that, but there's not a lot of that. The constraint is more of the dice rolls, what resources you have, and what cards you have. I believe despite this having a lot of random elements, the dice, and just, tons of decks of cards, it is really strategic, and it's not meant for people to just kind of jump into a game and play it, whereas Catan, I think, actually has a lower learning curve. This, you really need to understand the cards in the deck to understand what you can do and where you want to be and what cards you want to fish out. Also, it's a little confusing to me because I would think that Duel of Princes is kind of the full version of the game, but actually in that version you're still not playing with a large percentage of the cards, so that just kind of confuses me, a little bit off topic, but I'm not really sure what game I'm meant to be or supposed to be playing. The different theme games are fun to understand the cards a little bit, but when you put them all together, some of the cards are gone anyway. So this game, I believe, would be liked by people who really enjoy kind of building up their own little tableau and do want to play the same game many times to really get that strategic flavor for what's in there and what is their best course of action. I don't think it's really meant for somebody just kind of as a light filler, as a replacement to play 2-player Catan. So if that sounds like the game for you, check it out. That's Rivals for Catan.